So we will continue with our program, and in this series of lecture we will try to come to our original goal of creating a multi-pane user interface. That is, when we click on one item in the list, another activity with another fragment should start and show us the details. So in this lecture you will learn about how to start an activity from a fragment and how to actually implement the multi-pane display. So let's start programming. I will just do a quick revision. We now have following files in our program: report, report activity, report fragment, report list activity, report list fragment, report store, and single fragment activity. So these are the files that we currently have, and we are now going to start working with them. So fine. So the first thing that we will be doing is that when a user presses an item in the list of reports, a new report activity which will host a new fragment will appear and display the details for a particular instance of the report. So let us see that how do we start an activity from a fragment. So starting an activity from a fragment is not very different than what we did earlier in the very beginning in the math quiz app, where we started an activity from another activity. Similarly, we can start an activity from the fragment. Only thing you have to do is that you have to call fragment.start activity, which takes intent as a parameter, and then this will start the corresponding activity. So let's start coding. So we will go to report list fragment class. This is our report list fragment class, and in this we will, let's say, update what was earlier doing nothing but just showing a toast, the on click method, but this time now it will send an intent to start an activity. So I will remove this code and I will write intent because I'm going to start an intent equal to new intent, the context, and the actual class. So this is an example of explicit intent, as you may have guessed. So I do this and then I do start activity intent. That's it. I do an alt int, so my error goes away. So now I have started an activity from my on click. So when I do the on click, I take an intent, which is nothing but a message object. I give it the actual path. So this is an explicit intent, and then I start that activity. Okay. Now let us try to run our program and to see that what's the impact of these two lines here. So we start our program, we look at it. So the build is still running. Yes. Now let me click, and as you see that I can see the detail. Let me go back, click, I can see the detail. Currently we don't have any detail in the report, but now we are starting another activity by clicking, while earlier it was just showing a toast. So let's move on and do some more coding. So number one thing is that we can tell our report fragment, that which report to display by passing the report ID as an intent extra when the report activity is started. So that's one thing that we can do. So let's start putting some extra into it and see that how do we enable that functionality. So let's go to the report activity class. So this was our report activity class, and in this class, apart from rest of the code, which is very simple here, let me bring it closer. let's write some more code. So public static final string, and because it is final and string, it will be capital extra report id equal to, now you would like to give a unique name. So one way of deciding this unique name is to uh, decide it just like the way you decided your package name. So for example, in my case, I will just call it in.ac.psync, something which just makes it unique for me, dot psync dot mc16 dot, and then I can just give it the my name of my program, dot report underscore id. Okay. And then I create a new intent where I will use extra to pass the extra information. So I create, so we have done that earlier in the math quiz application as well. So I think you can relate it to that, that whenever we have to do something that is pass an extra, we write the code like this, the report id. So here we do nothing but intent equal to new intent context comma report activity dot class, and then intent dot put extra um, extra report id report id, and then I will return this intent. So yeah, so now I am using an extra. The method is same as we did in the math quiz, that we created a new intent method and we put an extra, and this time we are passing the report id. So after creating this explicit intent and calling put extra to pass, we can now update our report holder class to use this new intent method. So let's go back to our previous class that we were changing. So report holder class, and we should just remove this line and change it with intent equal to report activity dot new intent method and pass it the activity, and again writing. So that's fine. So now we are passing the id when we are sending the intent. Now let us, because we are passing an extra, we will have to retrieve an extra. That's the second part of the work. So now let's write some code to retrieve the extra. So now our report ID is within the intent, and there are two ways in which a fragment can access data in its activities intent, because this is passing through the activity and we need to get the data in the fragment. So one way is an easy and direct shortcut way, which we will be using here, and then there is another way which is kind of a little bit more complex and uses fragment arguments, which we will learn today in this lecture. However, first let's start with the easier method, and in the easier method we simply use the get activity method of the fragment and we access the intent directly, and later on we will use the more complex method. So let's use it. in the first. So we will go to our report fragment class and we will go to the onCreate method of it, where we are passing the bundle, and this is fine in the onCreate. And now instead of this we will be adding some more code, which is that UUID report ID equal to UUID get activity. So the fragment is just calling get activity method and getting the intent of the activity that it wants, and then it is trying to get the data. So report activity dot extra report ID, then the line which we just deleted, we add it but in a different way, dot get activity dot get report and our report ID. Yes, so alt enter. So yeah, so now this part is done. So now we have to also do some update into the way we had written the report fragments view. So let's add some more code, but this time in the onCreate view. So essentially first step is that apart from the title field, we would also be adding few more details here. So let's come here and say title field dot set text report dot get title, and then we can also do in the resolved checkbox that resolved checkbox dot set checked report dot is resolved. So we have added some code to update the view, and now let's watch what difference it has brought in. So earlier, if you remember, it was only showing an empty detail. Now we will see what difference it has made. So earlier it was empty detail. Now let's see, we are clicking on report number 3, and now you see that the title is filled in. Let me go back. So, and this time I will click on report number 4, where we have already put the resolved checkbox. So now you see it comes as resolved, while if I press on report number 3, it is not. So essentially, using the intent and the extra, we are passing two values. One is the title and one the status of this checkbox. So, and then we are able to successfully pass it, and the fragment could call the get activity method and could get access to the intent data and use it. So this was fairly easy. Now this was fairly easy at first, but there is a downside to it. Number one, that we always insisted that fragments should be independent of the activity which are hosting them, so that they can be used across different activities. However, in this case, if you see the way we have written the code, our fragment is dependent on an activity which is having this variable called extra report ID. So this actually limits the use of our fragments, reuse of our fragments, which may be okay in our this particular case, but is not a good approach. A good approach or a better solution would be that we keep this ID somewhere else in a space which belongs to the report fragment, but then rather than keeping it in the report activities personal space, and then report fragment can access this data whenever it wants without relying on the report activity. So currently it is relying on the report activity, which is not good. We want to separate the both process out, and this functionality is achieved what we call the fragment arguments. So let us see that how to use fragment arguments in our program. So each fragment instance can have a bundle, as you can see, can have a bundle object associated with it, and this bundle can have key value pairs of the data, just like we saw earlier in case of activities, and we can use some of these to store the information that we want. So this key value pair inside the bundle is known as argument, and that is what we are going to use it. So in order to create a fragment argument, we will have to use the bundle object and then do it. So let's get started by first creating the bundle objects and then attaching the arguments to it, which the fragment can use later on. So in order to use these arguments, we will have to first create a bundle and then attach the arguments bundle to the fragment by calling a method called setArguments, fragment.setArguments bundle. And this attachment must be done before the fragment is associated with an activity. Okay, so usual method in Android programming is to add a static method named new instance. The static method is named new instance to the fragment class, so that this method can create the fragment instance and bundles up and sets its arguments. So when the hosting activity need an instance of a fragment, we will have to call the new instance method rather than calling the constructor directly. So essentially what we are saying is that instead of a constructor of a report fragment, we will be creating a new instance method of the report fragment, and when the activity needs to use report fragment, it will have to call that new instance method. So let's get started with programming. Create static final string arg report id equal to report underscore id, and now let's go and put some public static report fragment new instance. That's the method that we want to create. UUID report ID, and inside this static method we will create our bundle and then we will put few things into it. So our id dot port id, and then we will return the fragment return fragment. So yes, this is the method that we will now be using instead of the constructor of the report fragment directly. So now my report activity class should call this method when it needs to create the report fragment and not the constructor. And when it calls it, it will pass in the UUID it received from its extra, and then return to the report activity and then create fragment, retrieve the extra from the report activity's intent and pass it in the report fragment new instance method. So that's how we will. So this is a slightly complicated loop that first we create a new instance and the report activity passes it and then it retrieves. Then the earlier method where we were just calling that activity. But in this method, our fragment will be independent of the report activity. So that's the best part. So let us see how do we achieve it. Let's go to the report activity now first, and instead of this line, let's use something else here. Which is to change the create fragment with not just this but UUID, report ID equal to UUID get intent dot get serializable extra report ID, and then return report fragment dot new instance dot report ID. So yes, so now we have added a good amount of code here, which can help our report activity to call the fragment using the new method. Now here you will notice that the activity has to still depend on the fragment, because that is what the need of the applications usually are. So activities have to know about the fragments that they are using, but there is no need for the fragments to know which activities will be using them. So the independence is not both ways. Now let us focus on the next step, which is to retrieve the arguments. So when a fragment needs to access its argument, it needs to call a method called getArguments, and then one of the type specific get method of the bundle to get the specific value. So let's write some code and try to see that how it is done. So we will go back to the report fragment class, and in that we will go back to the onCreate method, and we will try to see what we can do here. So okay, so one more thing, we now can make it a private and it will be fine. So it will be fine, it will not affect it, the program. So we can make it as private, and now let's go back, and as you see that this is the older method, so we will now remove it, and we will change it to the new method UUID get arguments dot get serializable, and then the report ID. So that is it. Now let's try to run our program and see if it is still working and doing the same thing. So now we can see that it is still doing the same thing, but our fragment no longer depends on the activity, and our fragment is now totally independent. So this is a better way of doing passing the data using fragment arguments. So now let's see our application one more time. So I am clicking on report 1, then I am clicking back. Now currently the report 1 is unchecked. Let me put a check here and come back. Okay, so it is still unchecked. So what is happening is that I am modifying my report detail, and these changes are saved in my program, but when I am returning, my recycler view is still unchanged. And what I need to do is that I need to inform the adapter of my recycler view that the data has changed so that it can refetch the data and reload the list. As we have solved this problem earlier, we will try to solve it by writing some code. Essentially, we will have to modify the onResume method, which is called when an activity is destroyed by pressing the back button and then recreate it. So let us see what we write. So let's go to the report list fragment, and so far we had not overridden the onResume, but now there is a need for it. So we override super dot onResume, and all we have to do is to call this update UI method because this is what needs to be called. So update UI method. So we have called it. Now the another thing which we need to do is we need to make a smaller change in it because now we are calling it in the onResume as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping code which says if adapter is equal to null, then do the same thing that we have been doing so far, but else just do call a method which is called notified dataset change. So this method is there to make sure that the adapter reloads it. And now let us try to see that what happens when we run our program now. So we made just very small change, the onResume which we did, and just to take care of the change. So now we click program. Here we go. So as you see, report 1 is unchecked here. Click, I check it, go back, and now it is checked. So now our program is a complete program where we have going from the list of details to the details, coming back, everything is in sync and everything is working. Now in this case, if you remember when we were discussing activities and intent, and we said that you know what, if you want a result back, then you have to start an activities differently, but if you don't want a result back, then you have to start an activity differently. Same thing here we did not need to get results while we were working, but if we were working it, then we would have to start our activity differently, essentially calling the method start activity for result and then modifying the on activity result method to retrieve the result value. This thing we did not need here, but you may need in your other programs. The fundamentals are same as we studied in activity for the fragment as well. So thank you, and let us do some more coding in our another class where we will be adding more functionalities to this program. So thank you.